Feast of Offal. Let me explain that name. I came up with that title for a reason. Offal is the waste and byproduct of the butcher's art, right? So they're cutting up, cutting up an animal and making it into, cuts of meat that they can sell. And then there's bits and pieces that they can't put out on the shelf to sell. They'll have to use some other waste. Usually it's the waste and byproduct, the skin and the hair and the toenails and the bones and whatever, right? Offal, right? The waste and byproduct of the butcher's art. In some ways, you can use some of that stuff. You can grind it up into sausage and put it in an intestinal skin and tie it both ends and kind of hide the offal that way. Some of it you just have to throw out. And for the most part, though, if we knew what it was, we probably wouldn't want to necessarily eat it, right? That's why it's a feast of offal. It's when we find ourselves eating the residue and the seconds and the byproduct of not just the butcher's art in this case, but of life. So when we get upset and we rail at the world and we take it out and we share it with our loved ones and our family and our spouse and our companion and even our pets. And we're, gosh darn the gosh dang, we kind of, what happens? It can happen. You kind of let it go, right? In the safety of home. We don't do that with our coworkers very often, or strangers, but we will do it at home. That's the feast part, where we're taking not the bits and pieces of an animal's carcass, but the bits and pieces that are the excess, the waste, the gross stuff of what's going on in our head. And we spew it out into the world through our mouth and through our gestures and our facial expressions, maybe even through writing. And it's a feast because others consume it up. They can't help it sometimes, right? If I'm raging and having a tantrum in front of my family, which I once did, thankfully I can say decades ago. It's been a long time since I was that guy. But I used to do that. They had no choice but to consume it, to slop it up. My wife in particular, because she's an attentive, caring, good woman. And she would listen to me rage, and it would hurt her. And I never hurt her. I never, touched her or anything. I never abused her, and I never called her names or said anything about her. But I raged against the world back then. I was upset at life, and I wanted to let it out, and I let it out, and my wife consumed it. And to a small degree, my daughter had seen that as well. Fortunately, she was very small, and I finally got control of that and stopped doing that kind of thing. Stopped. It was at a performing the Feast of Offal. So I got a handle on that, and then I recognized what it was, and I came up with a name for it, name it the Feast of Offal. But there's a second side of it as well. There's the consumption of the feast, the side where others are doing this, and we're soaking it up, because in some ways it's kind of a voyeuristic thing, better them than us, right? So someone's suffering, they're having a tantrum, they're having a tough time, right? We kind of put on a face that we kind of feel for them, but at the same time it's like, wow, so I'm not the only one that suffers, right? You kind of make some popcorn and eat it up and take in the feast. Well, watching others have a road rage, for example, is an example of that. Oh, look at that. It's very interesting. That person's really being aggressive. But in a way, we're kind of soaking it up. We're taking it in. And it's like taking in, poison, excuse me, just like when you eat, sausage, you don't actually know exactly sometimes everything that you're taking into your body. It may, whether it's good or bad for you. Likewise, when you consume the feast of someone else's feast of offal that they're giving out, you may be soiling yourself. You may, if anything, just for the voyeuristic nature of it, right? So I try not to do that as well. So this principle is an admonition to neither perform the feast nor consume the feast when it is presented before me. Feast of Offal can also be quite a distraction, and it's also a way of relieving energy and upset in an unhealthy way. And I would rather not be distracted, and I would rather release those energies and upsets, manage those things in a more healthy and mature way.